I'm Linda Hirsch, and this is EdCast, a program created and produced by educators for everyone interested in education. Today's headlines say it all: sexual assault, sexual predators, male aggression, and women finally speaking out. Along with high numbers of rape for women, 1 in 5 will be sexually assaulted in college. Today's millennial college female has a different take on sexual assault, what it means, and how it should be handled. But new definitions are creating new confusions, making it difficult for both men and women to navigate campus sexual encounters. My guest today is Vanessa Grigoriadis, the author of Blurred Lines: Rethinking Sex, Power, and Consent on Campus. Join us for a frank discussion on campus assault and consent, the move from no is yes to no is no, and now to yes is yes, making college sex safer for everyone. Coming up now on EdCast. My guest today is Vanessa Grigoriadis, author of Blurred Lines: Rethinking Sex, Power, and Consent on Campus. She is a National Magazine Award winner and contributing editor at the New York Times Magazine and Vanity Fair. Welcome to EdCast, and thank you so much for joining us today, Vanessa.
Thank you for having me.
Your book is covering so many topics that are in the news today, much more than probably when you wrote the book, on male predatory behavior and sexual aggression, but your focus is on the college campus. And I have to say at the outset, your book has already engendered much discussion, heated discussion, among my friends, my son, so I really was looking forward to welcoming you to the show and talking about the things that you raise in the book. So let's start.
Thank you.
What prompted you to write this book, and how did you go about doing your research?
I've been a writer for New York Magazine and the New York Times Magazine for quite some time. In 2014, wrote the cover story on New York Magazine's cover about the woman who was carrying her mattress around Columbia's campus. She said she was going to carry it until the school either expelled the boy that she said assaulted her, or until graduation. Emma Solkowitz, some people know her name, or Mattress Girl, as some people called her. And she indeed did carry that mattress until graduation. I began research kind of around her, and then decided to expand my project to go around the country, speaking with students of all genders, of all relationships to sexual assault. Some people who said they were victims, others who said that they had never experienced it and they thought victims were weak, some boys who were in fraternities, boys who were woke boys. I am, you know, a Gen X mother of 2, but I don't look that old, so I was able to kind of blend in on campus and do some real research.
How many people did you speak with?
I spoke with about 120 students from across the country.
Good sampling. Let me ask you first question. How prevalent is sex on campus? Are students having a lot more sex than they used to in general?
Well, look, this is a very complicated and challenging subject, and it has a lot of paradoxes within it. And one of them is that students indeed are not having more sex on campus on average, right? About the average student has about 8 hookups through college. So if it's a 4-year university, that's 1 per semester. That's not really what you might expect when you think about the Animal House kind of, you know, platonic ideal of a college experience in America. So what we do know is that a lot of those sexual experiences, early sexual experiences, because many people arrive at college as virgins, some will graduate that way as well, but many of those early sexual experiences have sexual assault within them.
So let's talk for a minute about sexual assault. How prevalent would you say sexual assault is on campuses today?
So the number that you always hear in the news is 1 in 5 women will be the victim of sexual assault by the time they graduate from college.
Big number.
College women, right? Okay, that's a very big number. If you speak to experts, you'll find some conflict about this. So most will say that it really depends on what your definition of sexual assault is.
Okay, so what is the definition of sexual assault?
Okay, so it's different on a college campus than in the real world with, you know, all our criminal statutes. So let's just
in the
first
real
say
world,
in
we
the
think of
real
penetration.
world, we think about penetration.
Right.
We might think about physical force, somebody being there with a gun, right? Or some sort of coercive sex, meaning like deep coercion. Okay, you are an undocumented immigrant,
so you must,
and your boss at the restaurant says, if you don't have sex with me, I'm going to call ICE. Okay, that's coercive sex, right? That's the real world.
But on planet colleges, you call it.
On planet college,
I love that
things
phrase.
are a little bit different. You know, in New York, we have Andrew Cuomo has passed a law that says, you know, that basically anything that isn't the most kind of enthusiastic sex might even be considered sexual assault. So not only is he talking about, okay, if you grab a woman's butt at a frat party, that I'm definitely going to call that sexual assault. It doesn't matter if you had a gun. It doesn't matter what kind of coercion was used. Let's just call that disrespectful behavior that we can reclassify as sexual assault. Okay. But he's also put a law in all the public and private colleges, and California has this law, Connecticut has this law, Illinois has this law that says you must get some sort of enthusiastic feedback from the partner, right? So
for it not to be assault.
Right.
Okay.
So the old rule used to be you got to say no, right? No means no. Okay?
Right.
You're agreeing to have sex with anybody else at any point unless somebody says no.
Right.
The current thinking is, well, if I want something from you, I want your iPhone, I want your wallet, I have to say, hey, can I have that? So now why does our theory of sex say everybody's agreeing to have sex with everybody else at any moment until somebody says no?
Right. So you're
that
saying you
really
have
make
to
a lot of
say
sense.
yes.
You need to say yes or
Okay.
give some sort of moan. And we have, you know, this also, all the Ivy Leagues have this rule.
Right.
You know, many state colleges have this rule.
I want to go to that for a minute, though, because you raise an interesting distinction about the kinds of campuses where assault and rape occur. You want to tell us the kinds of campuses where it's prevalent and the campuses where it's not?
Well, it is quite prevalent across many different kinds of campuses, but, you know, certainly the ones that have the fraternities or have a lot of culture around college football have a much larger problem.
You said the residential colleges have
residential
a
colleges,
bigger than a community college or a commuter school.
Exactly. So all of those 1 in 5 women numbers come from studies of residential colleges. For student-on-student assaults, I mean, this makes perfect sense, right?
Right.
If you're a commuter college or you're a community college or an online college, you know, your students aren't hanging out in a dorm at 11:30 at night getting sloshed, and who knows what happens. So this is, you know, this is where the risk lies.
So let's go back to Emma Solkowitz for a moment, the mattress girl, as she's been named. You refer to her throughout the book because in some way her situation is emblematic almost of the whole blurred lines controversy. We know now that her aggressor, the Columbia, reached a settlement with him. So let's talk a little bit about her case and just the way in which it shows some of the confusion that's surrounding the situation today.
Sure. So, you know, when Emma first came out with her story, and she came out publicly, she told the New York Post, she talked to me at New York Magazine, Hillary Clinton said that image of her carrying her mattress, that should haunt us all, right? She went to the State of the Union with Kirsten Gillibrand, the senator from New York. So there was quite a bit of public support for her. Now, the boy had not spoken publicly to that moment, but he did start to speak publicly in a very carefully managed media attack on her story. And he put forth a bunch of text messages between the two of them that implied that, you know, she was potentially the aggressor.
Can we go back to her story, though, just for a moment? Because I think the switch in what happens, she begins by saying, and I think it's what you refer to, that they had consensual sex at the outset, but that at a certain point, it got changed, and he pinned her down. I believe she says he wanted anal sex, and she did not want that. So there's where, again, he says it had been consensual. Is that where some of the problem lies in these particular situations? So tell us a little bit about that.
Well, okay, to go back to the idea of what is consensual sex, you know, I think some people watching this would think, well, wait a second. So they had oral sex, they had vaginal sex, then she didn't want to have anal sex. Well, she was already in the bed, right? Like now she's going to call that rape, you know? But if you really think about it, being anally raped is pretty intensely awful. And, you know, if she didn't want to do that, that was well within her rights to stop at any point, and consent can be revoked. You know, this is a matter of respect. I mean, everybody should kind of understand this, whether they want to call it rape or not.
So how does a woman prove that this has happened to her?
Well, this is the problem, basically, is that she had a very hard time proving it. And in many of these cases, you know, we're not talking about stranger rape. We're not talking about finding DNA and linking it up with somebody who's perpetrated other crimes. We're talking about a he said, she said situation. If you talk to experts who study this and, you know, you talk to them a little bit, not so much on the record, they will tell you, this is the problem. It's the he said, she said. It's the consent defense. She wanted it, right? It's not my fault. She consented at that moment. What evidence does she have? Really nothing, right? So this was the bind that Columbia University found itself in. They didn't know who to believe. And they found, you know, for him, basically.
Now, you mentioned many factors that you think are contributing to this climate that we're having today. You mentioned social media. How does social media play a part in this?
So, you know, part of my contention in the book is that what's really at issue here is not so much sex and relationships, it's the one-night hookup, right? And we know that social media has really reinforced the kind of one-night hookup, because not only are people meeting through online dating sites, but they're kind of thinking of each other as sexual objects. They're seeing each other and almost fantasizing about the other person before even really meeting the person and having a real understanding of that person's wants and needs and desires.
Do they also think they know people better than they do? I know you mentioned something called acquaintance sex.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
So, I mean, you know, what we used to call, you know, what happened to Emma Sulkowicz, we used to call that date rape, right? The idea that somebody who was your date would then take advantage of you. You know, newer way of speaking about it is acquaintance rape, because sometimes it doesn't happen between romantic partners. It's just somebody who meets somebody at a party and kind of corners them. So, you know, I think that we really need to think about the way that social media is an acquaintance culture. Everybody still has a, you know, very small group of real friends, 6 to 8 real friends, but through social media we may have several hundred acquaintance friends. And we, as college students may go to a party and think, oh, that person that I met on social media, I liked his picture, he liked my picture, that person is safe because that person is my friend. Well, the person's not your friend. That person's just an acquaintance.
Now, you also mentioned the role of alcohol, and you spend a lot of time talking about alcohol as a major risk factor. what happens? Do women drink their consent away? I mean, tell us about alcohol.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is somewhat controversial to say that women drink their consent away, but I do think that we need to think about alcohol in two ways. You know, the not so controversial way is to say, okay, men do use alcohol to get women drunk, right? Get her drunk, say you love her, sleep with her. Right? I mean, this has been the play of a lot of guys who are not so confident in their game without alcohol, right, for a long time. In terms of binge drinking among women, we know that it's up on college campuses and has continued to kind of be up, right, for at least the last decade. And that's been, I think, really problematic, because I do think that women don't have a sense of their tolerance. They may enter a blackout state where they may be doing things that they wouldn't want to do otherwise. There's also, you know, really a lack of safety for a woman who goes to a frat house or an off-campus apartment with a bunch of guys that she doesn't really know very well and passes out on a futon or a couch and thinks, I'm just going to go to sleep. Well, I'm sorry, you're in a very dangerous situation. You're in a way more dangerous situation than you are, you know, walking to the subway.
I was mentioning to you before we spoke, I belong to a book club, and I talked about your book, and I think my friends are, you know, very forward-thinking. They don't believe there's any justification for rape or assault, no matter what. And while we were recounting our own experiences as young women, everybody had a story to tell about something that had happened to them. You know, a groping, a suggestion, a leer, whatever. But they began to talk about how women are dressing today when they go to parties, when they go to frat houses, and are they not in some way signaling, are they not objectifying themselves in some way? There's no excuse to assault, there's no excuse to rape, but are they giving that message that no is yes? Are they saying, I am available, I do want this? What would be your response to that?
Well, look, I mean, I think that it's complicated when you're from a different generation and you're looking at the sexual and, you know, kind of aesthetic mores of a younger generation, right?
But theirs was a pretty free generation sexually.
Okay,
I mean, I have to say,
true.
it's a very free generation
but,
sexually.
I mean, you know, you could say, well, you know, that woman, what is she wearing if she's going to that bar? I mean, I feel like that's a conversation that women can have among women, because we know that we're not, you know, really saying she asked for it, but once you start opening the door to that kind of conversation, a lot of people who aren't so open-minded will get involved and start saying, well, maybe she really was, you know?
Or at least she's giving a mixed message.
Right, exactly. So my theory, after having interviewed a lot of 20-year-old women across the country, I think that the way that they're looking at it is, look, you know, I live in a culture where I can't even see an anchor on the television news who doesn't have, you know, fake hair and isn't wearing a peach-colored, you know, tank top, basically. Women are completely sexualized in every single aspect of our society. The look is all about, like, how attractive are you? How sexually available are you?
Look at the Kardashians.
Right,
I
the
mean,
Kardashians are,
something.
exactly, they're in the time capsule for the 2010s. They started this whole thing. But I'm going to say, this is the way I'm going to dress, and I don't care what you think of it, but I am also going to set my sexual boundaries really, really strictly and call out guys that I think are not treating me right. And that is my message. That is what I believe makes me the safest, because I'm not really going to go back to wearing overalls. I'm not going back to the 1970s ideal of a feminist. You know,
1970s ideal was a mini skirt.
Some of them.
Practically naked. I don't know. It was not so dressed quite so as you might think. I do want to talk now about men and boys, and the fact that clearly, when I mentioned this to my son, who's 30, who's been in a fraternity, I could feel he was a little bit defensive about the whole thing, but he did say, you know, alcohol, it's true, impairs the decision-making process for both sexes.
Right.
That, you know, and I know you mentioned that in the book as well, that a guy may not have such bad intentions himself, but under the influence of alcohol.
Right.
And I think there is, as you pointed out, a blurred line or a confusion about what's appropriate. Or maybe there isn't, and it's just a male defense. So I want to read you a Facebook posting that was sent to me, and it's from the male perspective, right? And he says, "Don't beat me up, but is this something I need to know? Is every blunt sexual overture harassment?" So what do you say to this, and does this mirror what you've seen among men in terms of some of them really don't know what's right, or is this just BS? They know, but they prefer not to.
No, I think some men really don't know what's right. You know, particularly at this moment where we've had this outcry among the victims of Harvey Weinstein, Mark Halperin, you know, Brett Ratner, just these, you know, famous men from New York and Hollywood, the most powerful men really in our country in terms of the glamour businesses. You know, the thing that a lot of men, my friends, are saying now, you know, in this post is it is so hard to make a sexual overture. You know, it's really hard to come on to somebody for a guy. Now they're afraid.
You mean it's hard anyway because they're shy or they're hard?
Psychologically hard because people don't like to be rejected.
Okay. So now it's even more difficult.
And now they're really scared. Now they feel, okay, here's all these guys in the news for doing these things, and I don't want to be one of them. How do I communicate to a woman, I think you're pretty and I like you and I want to take you out, without being seen as a harasser, basically? You know, what the Facebook post is saying. Look, I think that's hard. I think that's a really hard question.
Now this, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think most women would say, come on, you know when somebody's not into it.
Well, let's flip it back again,
true.
because you raise so many complexities here in shades of gray. That's why I found your book so fascinating, so I can go back and forth on all these different sides. So let us go back again and look at Betsy DeVos trying to, I would say, roll back some of the Title IX protections that are currently in place to protect women, and her position now is that we've gone way overboard. We're not giving men their fair shake. And so it raises a question to my mind, and you do discuss this, how often are men falsely accused of sexual assault? Do we know? Are they really being victimized a lot in this regard? Do we need to worry more about them than we do about women, or?
No, we definitely don't need to worry about them more. I don't think we need to worry about them equally either, which is my problem with her, rollback. But I think the thing is that, you know, things like the Rolling Stone story about UVA, which was proven to be basically a hoax, those are very, very, very rare. It's very rare that a woman would make up a story out of whole cloth and you're in a Kafkaesque way stuck in this, you know, just like horror show and you can't get out of it. What a nightmare. You know, much more often there's a question about consent. And I do think on college campuses, because we're changing from this model of coercion meant one thing, now it means something different. No means no. No, now it's yes means yes. That there are boys who are kind of caught in this time of transition, and we do need to actually give them a break and not expel them. I think that's very true. At the same time, we know that this is the defense, right? I already said it. It's a he said, she wanted it, consent defense. And so most guys who are accused are not going to say, oh, absolutely, I sexually assaulted you. They're going to say, no, I had consent. So how do we pick the one who's lying from the one who's not lying?
Do you agree with Emma Sulkowicz and the women who defended her that when women do present these charges that they are not taken seriously, or that it's really stacked? I know you mentioned the difficulty of getting a rape kit. You take a shower, you erase whatever evidence you had, and who doesn't want to take a shower after something like that? But do you think that, you know, they are not given a fair hearing, or that it's really hard for women when they come forward?
I do think it's hard for women when they come forward, because I think you have to be quite brave to come forward. You know, remember, on the entire U.S. of 20 million college students, in 2014, there were only 6,000 reported cases of sexual assault, right?
Now this
so
is
a tiny amount of women actually came forward. You know, those people were brave.
Are men abused as well? I mean, are there,
yeah, I think they are.
What are your figures on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's much smaller. You know, it's some percentage smaller than women, but it's I think it's even harder for men to come forward because in the gay community, it's really not talked about. At least women talk about sexual assault among themselves with their girlfriends, blah, blah, blah. That same support does not exist.
Well, we're hearing it a little bit more now in the media,
little bit,
certainly.
yeah, with Kevin Spacey.
Yeah. You know, I was listening to NPR the other morning on my way to work, and Kate Mann, who's a Cornell philosophy professor, wrote a book called Down Girl, The Logic of Misogyny. And she refers to the sympathy that men tend to get. I think she calls it himpathy, which, you know, H-I-M, you know, himpathy. And she says what happens when a young man is accused of assault, a whole apparatus comes into play where, you know, say, well, yeah, maybe, but, you know, he was on his way to law school. He's such a good guy.
Yeah.
He had such a promising career ahead of him. He shouldn't really be made to suffer the consequences. Are they really basically saying this wasn't so important? I mean, is that the message? I mean, do you think there is more sympathy on the male side? What's your thinking?
I think there's a lot of sympathy
are we
for
a
guys
misogynistic society?
Yeah, I think we basically are.
Okay.
But, you know, I think for a long time, guys just knew that they would get away with this because even if there was kind of a report, they would have a whole amen corner. They'd have their friends and their family and everybody taking their side. We certainly know that the police wouldn't really, you know, prosecute these cases again without a stranger or a gun or anything like that. So yeah, I think we are, but I do think that's starting to change. I mean, one of the like shibboleths of the millennial feminist movement is believe women, you know, not even believe women first, just believe them, period. So they've really taken that under wing. It would be very hard to find like a progressive group of students on a college campus today that felt that they weren't, you know, kind of pro-DACA, anti-Trump, like all of the kind of progressive agenda, plus the believe woman, pro-survivor.
So what can colleges do if they, and parents, what can we do to kind of see if we can make this better, if we can make college sex safer?
You know, I think parents should look in the student code of conduct of the child's school. And I think that if you don't want to talk to your child about sex and sexual assault and that whole conversation makes you kind of nervous, if you look at that student conduct code, you may find that there is quite a broad definition of sexual assault in there. And it's very graphic and details exactly what is consensual and what isn't. And you could say to your, you know, son or daughter, like, hey, this is your student conduct code. I just wanted to share it with you. You should read it, and we should have a conversation about it.
Also mention the most dangerous time for a student on campus, and what is that time?
Yeah, so the most dangerous time is the beginning of the school year.
Call it the red
kind
zone.
of just, yeah, it's about the first 6 weeks of school, where freshman girls in particular are coming onto campus without a lot of experience with drinking, and they're not really invited to any like cool upperclassmen parties of like, you know, the musical theater troupe. They're just only invited to the frat parties. That's all they know about because that's all the flyers that they see and what people talk about on social media. And so, you know, those frats are not like necessarily predatory, but there will be a lot of guys who will go to those parties kind of looking for girls.
Do we need to get rid of frats? Do you think they should be abolished?
I mean, I think it would be
running
awesome
out of time,
if
so I'm asking
we
you
co-educated the frats. I think that would be fantastic.
Meaning have girls and not make them single
I think
sex.
there should be girls and boys. We don't allow single sex really of, you know, anything other than sports. It should be
We
that
have
way.
only a minute. I want to just ask you very quickly. Toward the end of your book, you quote you say young activists are asking, whose task is it to prevent sexual assault? Is it the woman's duty to avoid it or the man's task to prevent it? Can we answer that question? Do we have an answer for that? And what would it be briefly?
Yeah, I have an answer for it, which is that I think on a theoretical level, it's the man's task, but on a practical level, it remains the woman's task because we know that self-defense and more kind of advanced and complex forms of self-defense really do keep girls safe. So girls should look into those things.
Thank you. And we've run out of time, but this has been such a
Thank you so
wonderful
much.
conversation.
Thank you.
Vanessa Grigoriadis, author of Blurred Lines, Rethinking Sex, Power, and Consent on Campus. I thought it was a fascinating book, and I want to thank you so much for coming to join us today.
Thanks for having
Thank
me.
you. My pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today. That's it for this edition of EdCast. Till next time, class dismissed.